Okay, wonderful. Great. Well, it's 9:02 a.m. I see a lot of familiar faces. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Kellie, for being here. Brittany and I have known Kellie for a long time, but I met Kellie while volunteering for the EFA back in 2019 with a diversity initiative. Kellie has been a longtime EFA member and has been very involved in multiple publishing organizations besides EFA, which I will probably let her share with us first. And one second, here we go. Kellie, I have your bio right here. Okay, here we go. Kellie Hultgren is an independent editor and production manager with 2 decades experience in book publishing. After 10 years of working in-house, she launched KMH Editing to provide coaching, editing, and project management for traditional publishers and indie authors planning to change the world through story. A member of ACES, the EFA, the Professional Editors Network, and the Minnesota Book Publishers Roundtable, where I know that you had some pretty, you held some pretty important roles there. Kellie has presented on topics including volunteering, publisher, freelancer relationships, and editorial best practices. Outside of work, Kellie is a Fiverr artist, a musician, and a sci-fi geek. And I know you've taught me a lot on that subject that I knew nothing about. So welcome, Kellie. We will have all of Kellie's information. I'll be putting it in the chat as she starts also. And then a recording of this presentation will be available after the meeting, and it should post before the end of the week. So Kellie, welcome.
Hello. All right. Is my sound working?
Perfect.
Yes. Okay, cool. I lost it and logged back out. Also, as you can see, I have like the worst time of day. So I have my little glowing light dots.
It's like a little glow filter.
It's a little glitter to go for my day. So hi, everyone. I am Kellie Hultgren, as I have been introduced, and I have a extremely broad experience in the publishing world, partly because I started out wanting to edit, but of course the job that I wanted was not necessarily available to me at the right time, so I took what I could get, and as a result I have been through almost every stage of the publishing process at some point in my professional career. I started out with what I called assistant typesetting, so it was making sure that changes had been made correctly by other people. No power, no any like decision making whatsoever. I had to keep my hands out of things, and that was an amazing learning experience. So that when I went on to work in a print shop, work in a book, manage a book distribution warehouse, work for a self-publisher, work for a K through 12 publisher, I had all of this background available about the systems that I was working with. So Linda, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen.
You should be able to share without a problem, but if not, let me know. Do you have the share option at the bottom? There we go.
I do.
Lovely. It looks great.
All right, cool. So with this going, I can't see anyone's face. So Linda, please give me a shout if somebody is.
Yeah, I will. The only thing I was going to mention, it looks like there's a little bit of a clicking sound coming from the microphone. I don't know if you're too close to the microphone or if it, but I'll let you know.
Yeah.
If it, oh, now we can't hear you. Hold on. So now there seems to be an audio. Let's see. It wouldn't be a meeting without a little technical.
All right. How about that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. This is it without microphone. So
it sounds wonderful, by the way. It's very clear. So thank you.
All right. So, and I will note that my slides are extremely bare bones. They're very word heavy, and I'm aware of it. But hopefully what we're going to cover today has a lot more to do with questions and getting a sense of this field than actually reading every word on the page. I'll make these available afterward if anyone wants to have them. My career took me on this weird tour, and then I ended up going freelance in 2010 as a full-time freelancer. I had already been taking gigs on the side. And I worked for a bunch of the companies that I'd worked for before, and the most recent one had been as a production editor at this educational publishing company, Learner Books, that does basically library books for K through 12 audiences. And in that capacity, I had been keeping track of approximately 36 books a year, which is a lot compared to many other companies, but they were all very short. They were all photo illustrated, and they all had to go through an entire process of layout, editing, review, approval, permissions, sign off to get from manuscript to printer. And that is kind of the heart of what production editing is. So what does a production editor do in general? It depends. Every single company has a different understanding of what production editing is supposed to be. So when you meet somebody who says, oh, hi, I'm a production editor, there's a very serious chance that they might do any number of things. In my previous job, I did a lot of layout. In a current contract job, I do no layout. Both of those have production editor in the title. But overall, what you can expect if you've run into a production editor is that it's some kind of editorial project management role. It's usually a role that is held within a team. So you've probably got acquisitions editors, regular editors, editorial people ahead of you in the process, and then you have design people and printing people after you in the process. Production editors often have mid-level decision-making powers. So you can not set the budget, but you can work within the budget. You can sometimes use that money in different ways depending on the project. You have schedule setting power. You have the power to select freelancers. So it's a very messy middle kind of work, but it also has a lot of flex to it. And then production managers in general tend to manage some kind of interdepartmental communication. So coordinating between editorial and design to areas that don't always talk well to each other. And then often prepping things so that when marketing comes onto the scene, they'll also have things in order.
Kellie, can I ask you, are you okay with us asking you questions throughout your slides? Would that be okay?
Yes, just remember that I can't see anyone's hands in the air, so.
Yes, that's why, no, and I just wanted, just for clarification, I think this is really thorough. I love how you're breaking it down. I was wondering, this is not something that you go to college and you get a title or a degree in production editor, right? There's not a certificate, a production editor certificate. So this is something that any freelance editor could build a skill set to eventually become one and work their way into becoming a production editor, right?
Not everyone. It is really not a job for every single editor out there. And I will cover that later.
Perfect. Great. Okay.
So this is just a list of things that a production editor might do. These are skills that might come in handy, but not every production editor is going to do them. So it is typically going to start with a manuscript that has already been edited. So you will probably get a manuscript in Word if you are working for a traditional publisher. And then it might involve scheduling copy editors. It might involve scheduling proofreaders. It might involve evaluating freelancers. You might get involved with filing for metadata. You might get involved for requesting print estimates. You might end up doing layout or writing captions. Any one of these tasks might be involved in what a production editor does at a given company. But as a general example, my biggest freelance contract for production editing specifically, I received the final manuscript from the in-house editor. So it had been developed, it had been copy edited. The copy edits had all been integrated, so it was the final manuscript. And then my work at that point involved initiating the front cover design process, which was not any creative direction, just scheduling things, contacting freelancers, prepping to circulate cover designs to the various people who had sign-off power. preparing the manuscript for typesetting. So at that company, it involved type coding, inserting a little XML style tag before the headings to show what level they were. It might also involve setting up styles in Word. I would send the type-coded manuscript off to the designer to get laid out. I would circulate design samples once they were ready for approval by the publisher and review by the author. I would hire and schedule the proofreader. If we needed a fact checker, I would do that. If we needed a sensitivity reader, I would do that. I would compile that feedback into the pages, we call them the laid out book pages, and circulate those so that the author could sign off and the in-house people could sign off. I would make sure that invoices got to accounting when they needed to. Once all of that first round feedback was back, I would check that the designer had made the changes correctly, and if things had been missed, send them back to get those corrections made. All of this is being done in PDF. When I started, the company I was at still did it on paper, but nowadays it's almost all electronic. So there's a very rinse and repeat feeling to this project because it is all send it to the designer, make the requests, have the designer make the changes, make sure the changes are correct, get approval, get new changes, send them to the designer, make sure the changes are made correctly, circulate the pages, get approval until we have final pages. And then at the end, I would also review the printer proofs. I typically didn't do the actual print buying because it was a company and they had somebody to handle that. But that was my chunk of the middle, basically connecting editorial to design and printing, and often mediating between the needs of each department. And as you can see from that, there's very little editing in that flavor of production editing. I did a little bit of proofreading when there was an emergency need, but mostly I was checking that other people had done their work correctly and that that work got expressed as we expected it to in the typeset pages. So this is where some of that, some of what I mentioned to Linda about not being the job for everyone. There is very little work with text in several flavors of production editing. That said, a contract that I'm just completing now, I receive an outline, I do a developmental edit, I do a copy edit, and I prepare everything to go to the designer. This is for a children's book, so I select photo illustrations, I write captions, and then I make sure that everything has come together at the designer as expected, at which point I let go and the rest of the design process is handled in-house. So again, the answer is always, it depends, and it can be very frustrating, but also very rewarding.
I really like that though, Kellie, because for me, that just screams opportunities and, you know, following your passion, and if, you know, and then having that flexibility to maybe try something new and then go back to something else if that doesn't work for you. So just seeing all these as opportunities to branch out, and just, I think all of these skill sets, if you're going to be working in publishing, whether it be print, magazine, or all of those skills will transfer over easily to other disciplines within publishing or other areas. So wonderful. Yeah.
It's because it's in that middle, it's very rewarding to know what's happening. So even if, as I did, I spent 3 years as a full-time production editor, and it was not filling my cup. Because I wanted to be an editor. I wanted to work with text. I like the project management aspects. I like getting my hands into design every once in a while, but my real love was text editing. So when I went freelance, I primarily did that, but knowing how the text I was editing went into the design and printing process made a huge difference in how I approached some of my projects when I knew they were going into basically a large publisher workflow. So to that, production editors who are hiring freelancers want people who have depth of experience. So it means it's a really tough relationship to begin when you have no experience whatsoever. And I hate saying that, but having been a production editor who hired somebody who's brand new to the field and had to decide between winging it and turning in low quality work, or peppering me with questions so that my time was taken up and doing their job for them. That was very difficult, and it didn't make a great impression. But that said, experience can be more than just, oh, this is a book about cars and I know about cars. I know nothing about cars. I edited books about cars. What I knew going into that project was I knew what the typical publishing process was. So I knew we were in manuscript and that there would be time to go through and make shifts that would not end up affecting a laid out page because it hadn't been laid out yet. I understood the scope of work, and scope of work is a fantastic concept to build into your workflow, because if I hire somebody as a production editor and I want copy editing, I do not want them to turn back developmental editing. I don't have time in my workflow to go back and readdress the overarching structure, ideas, and content of a book. That has all been improved already because I'm working on a team. Somebody else has had eyes on that. Somebody else had said, take this to copy editing. We need to make sure that the language is clear, correct, and consistent. So I want someone, if I'm hiring, I want someone who understands that, and I can give it to them and they will ask me copy editing related questions. And also they'll know when something is way, way out of line. So if something comes in and an entire chapter is written in a completely different style, for example, we had one that, this was ages ago, so it's not fresh gossip, but we had one that had clearly been, had some text that had been pulled off the internet and not rewritten. And it was only one chapter. So when I ran into that as the copy editor, I queried, I didn't do the work. I knew that my job was to hand that back to the production editor, and the production editor would make the decision. So in hiring, we also want people who know how to use the tools. So please don't take a job that is delivered in Word and executed in Google Docs. That creates technical problems that we often as production editors don't have time for. It's helpful to know InDesign. It's not required, but what is very, very useful is to understand style guides, to understand style sheets, and to generally have a sense of voice, register, formality, all of those things that should be set by the time they come to a freelancer, but sometimes slip through.
Can I ask you a quick question about that regarding tools? And because we've been noticing, and we've discussed this, I think, before, that more and more InDesign is popping up as you know, an ideal skill to have as an editor, when InDesign really has nothing to do with all the editing we've studied or prepared ourselves for. So do you have any idea, like, what level of InDesign? Are we just talking about understanding, you know, what layers are? Like, because we see this, you know, I know that most of us don't want to go and take, you know, an intro to InDesign course, but if we feel that it's going to help us at some point, just understand basic terminology, and how, I think the idea of knowing InDesign is more that we understand what's being asked of us so that we can communicate that to the graphic designer or to the production editor. That's, I think, the purpose of understanding InDesign. It's not that we're going to be going in there and doing things in InDesign, or am I wrong on that?
It depends. I'm sorry. The answer is always
no, it's true, but that's a reality. So
it is. So where I see freelance editors specifically, but also in-house editors, where I see them needing to actually open an InDesign file and use the tools to make changes in a layout. Where I see that happening is in companies that are slowly compressing their workflow down because they don't have enough people. They don't want to hire enough people. They're trying to shove out more books per season with fewer staff. So the contract I have right now, the production editor receives the layout. So the layout's on a server at this company, so everyone can open it. The production editor receives the layout. They send it to me for circulating, because I'm the freelancer, right? I'm doing the freelance production editing. I circulate it to collect feedback and changes that need to be made. And then that in-house editor, who is listed, like, job title is production editor. It says editor in there. Is opening up the InDesign file and making changes to the text, but it's very limited. So it's only correcting text matters. You don't have to deal with image resolution. You don't have to deal with, you know, counting the number of picas between image and caption, like, ask me how I know. So when somebody who is in an editorial position does need to do that, very often it will just be open the file, adjust text. The thing it is super important to know whether or not you will be actually using the tool InDesign is to understand that in layout, when you make a change on one page, it can cascade into the changes on every other page.
Yes.
So this goes back to scope, where if you've been hired to do a proofread of a book that's already been laid out and you turn in a copy edit, you have not only delivered something that has to be approved by the author in many cases, which extends the deadline, but those changes may require anything up to a complete new typeset of the pages that are affected. And that comes at enormous time cost. And if you're working with indies, there's also often financial cost because the designer is having to redo work that was already done.
Kellie, one moment, please. Like, I see that Brittany, though we can't see her, she has her hand up. So Brittany, if you wanted to pitch in.
Thank you, Linda. And I apologize about my video again. It's only doing this in circle. So Kellie, I really like I just have to say, having this level of sort of behind the scenes insights is so helpful, because I think that as freelancers, whether we're copy editors or proofreaders or whatever, we don't, unless we've spent time in an in-house position, we really don't have access to this kind of knowledge. So and even like what you're saying about generally you shouldn't be doing a lot in InDesign, but if you are asked to do it, then that is telling you things about the company you're working with. That's telling you other things that will help inform decisions you have about okay, am I being paid an adequate rate with this company? Do I want to, what is the long-term relationship going to look like? Is it something that is going to work for me? So say this is definitely, I know we're recording this and that everyone, I really urge you to go back and sort of just listen to these little details, because you'll find that they're going to, the more you think about them, the more they're going to illuminate kind of what you're doing and just things that you need to know. So I just, all these little points, I'm yes, that's absolutely right. So thank you. I just had to pop in and say that.
You're welcome. And and you put your finger right on it too, which is that production editing is details, 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 because it's a lot of tracking. Who made requests? Were those requests? Who made change requests? Were those requests approved? Who else needs to approve them? And have they been correctly changed? So it's just looking at things over and over again. When I do a manuscript copy edit, I maybe get through it twice most before I stop being able to see errors on the page. Whereas if I'm doing production editing work and I have to check the same layout 4 times over the process, there are tricks that I have to pull to get fresh eyes on it. And part of that is part of the reason why, if you're hiring a freelancer as a production editor, you want somebody who is plug and play. You want somebody who knows how things work. You want somebody who is going to ask you smart questions and not basic questions. And you want somebody you can trust to get the work done without hand-holding, especially if it is a freelance position where you are in direct contact with an author. You want somebody who can do clear querying. You want somebody who can do respectful communication. So if you are looking to get hired by a production editor, who you might have found by networking, the first part is network. This is not a position that often gets out onto places like this. You are in-house most of the time. You don't need to be going to boards and mixers and stuff for the hustle. But I, as a production editor, will often go to networking events in person, and if it comes out in conversation that I'm doing that, I'll get requests about what I'm looking for hiring. When I hear that, I want to know what your experience is, and I want to know the details that are relevant to the work I am trying to get done. So we are right back to getting a sense for what kind of house is this? If I am hiring for a K-12 publisher and you are telling me about your experience with academic monographs, there are elements of editing academia that are useful, but I need to know that you understand what they are. So you don't come to me and tell me about your delightful facility with extensive tables and footnotes. You come to me with your experience in understanding clarity of language and organizational structure and a sense for when things need to be queried for fact check. Not a full fact check, just that sense of like, something's weird here, somebody should look at it. If you've got an idea of how somebody's in-house system works, you can also capitalize on that. Like, I happen to know that one of my clients has an in-house project management system, and I've worked with it before. I know that my current client has they prefer their freelancers to get a login for their server system, and instead of emailing files, post them to the server and email a link. So knowing little bits about that, which you've learned from your networking, which you've learned from your colleagues, gives you a sense, again, of how to pitch yourself to a company, and also how to decide if you want a job or not. I've had companies where their organizational structure was such an administrative bear that I just didn't want to deal with them, and that's fair. I had another company where they wanted me to work in InDesign, and so I pitched them a salary raise or not salary, but a rate raise, because I would have to pay for InDesign. They weren't going to give me a license, and it worked out. You can bring in your outside knowledge of project management if you've done any of that. There's a lot of overlap if you've done consulting for indie publishing, where you can set a schedule, keep other people on it, adjust it as needed, and communicate clearly in all directions about that. That's a huge thing to stick in your little resume when you're trying to reach out to production editors. And then again, all the basics of professional communication. Answer your email. Be pleasant when you respond to people. Be professional. Keep things at a semi-formal but still friendly level while you are setting all of your details and discussions. So I will run through, let's see here. I've got a little tiny bit of time. I'll run through these pretty quickly, but most of these best practices have to do with understanding the workflow. So when somebody approaches you about when a production editor approaches you about taking a project, ask questions. Read the email that they've sent you so you're not duplicating work. Find out what the schedule is. Always find out what the payment terms are so you don't accidentally end up on a 90-day payment schedule or with a rate that's not fair. Check in what platforms they expect you to use. Do you need to buy a monthly subscription to InDesign or not? Do they have alternatives to that? Find out what the style guide is. Request a copy of the house style guide. I love getting house style guides. Most of them are not super confidential, and they will tell you a lot about how decisions are made in that particular publisher. And then ask questions about other expectations. Will you be talking to authors directly? Some people hate that. So you should ask up front if that's going to be part of your work. It can be huge emotional labor. It can be a really good network builder, but it depends on what kind of work you want to do. Plan ahead. This is working with the project manager. They have their deadlines. You need to make the most of their time. So ask for examples of previous publications if it's in a series. Like, often they'll just send you a PDF of last year's book, and it's fine. When you get files, download them and check them immediately. I have been guilty of receiving an assignment and then not opening it for a week and discovering that like chapter 5 is gone. That was embarrassing. I got through it. They hired me again. And communicate efficiently, batch your questions together, be aware of the steps that are ahead and after you, before and after you. So probably there is an editor before you. Probably they have created a style sheet. Ask for the style sheet if you are in proofreading. Ask for the style sheet if it's a late copy edit. Sometimes it's there. Be consistent with your work. Again, PEs like working with predictable, reliable people who will ask questions early, who will help them get things done on schedule, who will not go off inventing their own vision for a book that has already been thoroughly visioned in-house. Follow the markup guidelines. One of my recent headaches was somebody who had ignored the request to do markup in sticky notes only in a PDF and had gone through and done insert, strike through, and highlight instead, which is great, but the designer requires sticky notes. So I had to go back as the PE. I had to go back and do that conversion. Details, details, details. understand your scope, understand what you've been asked to do, know your audience. So if you've got questions, have a sense of whether it should be directed to the author or to the production editor, or to your style guide under your own research, because you are the professional who's been hired here to take care of that. If you have that.
Sorry, when you were saying about asking questions, though, my concern is always, like, is it better to batch questions for the production editor, like on a weekly basis? I'm assuming you don't want to be getting a question a day or 3 questions a day. So
no, and I will. A typical process for me, if I'm working with someone, is I will try to batch my initial questions. So I will download all the files, look at them, and say, like, it appears that I don't have table 6.2. Is that still coming? Or is it already in-house and I just, can you send it to me? Or I have asked for like a photo sheet of the figures and photos for a book, just so that I can make sure that what the caption says on the page is describing the picture that's associated with the figure number. That's also a point where if you find a section that's really weird, it seems rough, it's in the wrong verb tense, maybe you've got some serious conscious language issues, like questions, like those are the initial questions to batch together. I try to get to that within a week of receiving the files. And then on my style sheet, this is heavily a copy editing kind of question. On my style sheet, I will start keeping track of questions I want to ask, but I will usually wait a couple of weeks before I batch them together and ask about them, because sometimes they are answered later in the book.
Kellie, this is Brittany. Yeah, I love this idea and what Linda picked up on there about batching, because I know, like, experience has taught me to do that. It's one of those things we learn by doing, and I also will keep a running list of, like, things for towards the later part of the project in case they haven't been answered. But one thing I've also found that helps me is whenever I do write those batched queries is that, like, I bullet point my questions, and then I also ask, like, I explain the problem, and then I ask a specific question that, like, this is kind of my take on how we should handle this, or how I, was thinking to handle it. Specifically, like, what is yours? And part of that is because, one, like, you typically do have an idea of, like, this is going to be the best way to handle this thing, but I want to make sure they're on the same page with me. So you want to defer to them. But also, I try to do this in my queries also to make less work for the other person, right? And that's one of the things I really try to keep in mind with production editors, is because, I mean, just looking at the scope of what you've told us in the last 40 minutes, it's a ton of work, a ton of very detailed work with all these little tiny threads going everywhere. And so, like, I want to help keep the threads in order and not be like a cat running in there and just scrambling everything. So,
yes.
So, yeah, I can, and listening to you really kind of confirms that, yeah, we need to be doing this type of higher level just consideration even more.
And the third person in there is the designer too, especially if you are working in laid out pages, if you're doing a proofread in PDF, phrasing things with the idea that the designer has to execute them, and, like, they may not speak editorial. So they may not, like, I had some come in that I had to fix because they were like, make plural to match verb. And, like, I'm sorry, your average designer has no idea what to do with that. And the most mean-spirited of them will insert make plural to match verb into the text. So, like, knowing who you're talking to and how to reach them most efficiently.
Yeah, and I have to comment on this specifically, because when we're all assuming that we're working with graphic designers within the US where English is their first language. And I have worked with graphic designers in South America and in Pakistan and in Africa, and it is not clear. We are speaking completely different languages, even though it's publishing. So it's really important to know who your players are and never assume, so that clarity here in your communications, being succinct and being clear about what you're asking or what the solution is I think fundamental to to avoid future headaches. So thank you for bringing that up, Kellie.
Yeah, and I mean, you also might just be somebody who is on their very first design job and they haven't learned the terms yet. This is a dense bit of jargon that we have built up, and it's centuries of jargon. Like, some of our jargon in publishing goes back to the invention of the printing press. So it's layered on thick. Many of us don't think about it, but again, our job is always to get the text to its most polished presentation and its most efficient communication of whatever the author wanted to say. So my final section, this is my only picture because I've had this project. When things go absolutely off the rails, production editors are a fine person to have on your side because they know which authors have weird quirks. They know which projects have had really difficult processes, editorial processes. Something like this has been totally rewritten. This had massive AI/plagiarism problems and had to go through an additional round of editing. Like, they know where it's rocky. Often they will warn you ahead of time to look out for things. PEs also know where the schedule has a little bit of buffer space. So I have had projects where I've done my initial review and I've gone back to the PE and said, oh, like, I see that this one chapter has twice as many notes as the other chapters. Can I just throw an extra day of work time in there to make sure that I can get to everything? They know what corners you can cut because somebody else will be keeping track of them in-house. They know whether they can pay you to do a heavier copy edit than anticipated, or if they need you to just stick to your original scope. They know who up the chain has the power to make decisions that are not within their remit, and they know when they have to step in and take over. So if you're working direct with an author and the author is just being a jerk, you can often use a PE to mediate that, get it back on track, or hand it off as appropriate. But you can't do that. Can't get any of that unless you communicate with your PE. So finally, I forgot about this slide, not gonna lie. Getting hired to be a production editor. If you want to be a freelance production editor, you basically have to have an established relationship with a press beforehand. And that is because they want to know if you demonstrate consistent quality of work. Can you be relied on to do all of the things that we've talked about so far? Do you know the company? Do you understand the team that you would be working with? Have you built successful connections already with people who are working on your projects? Do you deliver on time? Can you ask questions in a timely fashion so that you stay on time? Have you been a good person to work with all along as you communicated with the production editor, the text editor, the author, the designer, whoever you ended up interfacing with? And are you both reliable about hitting deadlines and flexible when things go weird? And I have yet to meet anyone who has been hired as a freelance production editor without some kind of experience ahead of time. How you get there is often all of those previous steps of getting hired by a PE so that you can show what you do. So with that, I will attempt to come back to the meeting. Okay. And I should be able to see people now. So if you have questions, does anyone have questions?
Okay, let's open it up. Let me see if I can, everybody, I think Kellie's information is also, I posted it in the chat, and I will post it in the description of the recording as well, if you want to get a hold of her. Let me see. Kellie, we're still seeing your screen. Okay. Are you seeing your screen or no? As long as you can see, if you can see us, then that's fine.
I went back to, let's see, I'm so used to Zoom. Okay, here we go. Stop sharing.
There we
Thank
go.
you all for your patience. Now I can see chat, which is amazing. Okay.
They're awesome. Questions, comments? Julia, do you want to start us off with something?
I would. Thank you so much, Kellie. This is very interesting. And I kind of have been mulling over in the last 24 hours or so how to pose a question to the senior editor I'm working with. And that's her title, but she's more of a production editor, I would say. And so I thought I might as well throw it into the conversation. And I've only been freelance copy editing for a little under a year. So I'm just still learning all of these things and norms. But my question is, and this is someone I have a great relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, if I want to pose a question about like basically schedule is running behind through no fault of my own, like I don't have material that I was supposed to have. Is it kind of shady to like CC the writers, or should I just send the should I just send the question to the PE? And like I know the writers too, so obviously I would do it politely. Like, is it better to keep everyone in the loop there, or just like shoot the PE a note to be like, hey, am I missing something in Dropbox, or do we actually not have the content?
It depends. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, of course.
If it were, I can see it going either way. My gut instinct is to just go to the PE because there's a very good chance that the writers know that they're behind.
Yeah, right.
And so your main focus right now, your primary goal is to get extra time so that you can accommodate their delay within your schedule. And that's a question for the PE, just to be like, I know the writers aren't on it, but we're behind schedule. I need to add X days to the final deadline, or if you have a sense of when they're going to deliver.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that. That's great. Thank you.
You don't want to take on the work of managing the writers. You are not getting paid to manage the writers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I do tend to, I'm like, okay, guys, let's fall into line. Like, I want to be that organizer, but you're right. I'm not getting paid to do that part.
Yeah, you should get paid a lot to do that, FYI. Writers.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else? Brittany, are you still there?
Yeah, and I have a quick question. And it's something that I have done in the past, and it's advice I've given other people because it worked for me. But I'm curious from Kellie's perspective, since we have Kellie here. So one of the things when I was first starting out, and I would identify publishers that I was interested in working with, and and I would do research and all that kind of thing, and I'd figure out who the production editor is and send them like an introductory email saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I do, and all that. And one of the things, because ultimately I generally wanted to copy edit for them, but my understanding was it was easier for them to say yes to hiring me for a proofread first before they got to know my copy editing, before they got to know me, my work ethic, my level of experience. And then if they felt good about it, they would move me up to proofreading. Well, I don't say up because they're just two different things, but they would move me to the copy editing, which is where in that particular instance I wanted to be. And so I just wanted to know, like, from your perspective as a production editor, is that a usual pathway? Is that something that you would encourage people to say, like, I would love to copy edit with you, but I would also be happy to start off proofreading so you can get a feel for does that kind of help the way that discussion goes, or what would you say?
It's still very, very common.
Okay.
I think it's partially because when you've got somebody, so proofreading typically takes place very late in the process. The pressure is on. And if you have somebody who goes wildly out of scope, most of the time you can just throw out the changes they made that were not appropriate to proofreading and carry on, which is yet another reason, do not go out of scope, because you will not get paid to do that work, and then your work won't even be used to improve the book, depending on how tight the schedule is and how firm the publisher is. So it is a very good way to get to know the style guide for a given publisher if they have a very specific house style, because you are focused on errors. Proofreading in outside of an indie context, indies get weird, but proofreading for most large publishers is a last check for inarguable errors. So they want to know that you can edit to scope. They want to know that you can catch the errors they care the most about. And they also want to know, if it's going to be a print book, that you can look at a laid out page and identify things like bad breaks, uneven spreads. You don't forget to check for running heads and footers. You make sure that the title on the title page and the copyright page and the running heads is the same, which is surprisingly hard. Hard to execute and hard to check. They want to know that you've got that detail-oriented look at their project, even if you are hoping to move up into copy editing.
Okay.
It is annoying. I know a lot of us don't enjoy the very, very close detail focus of proofreading. And it's also very hard to get a sense for those things about page composition without getting in-house training. So I will note, if you are in proofreading and you don't know what a bad break is, crack out your Chicago Manual of Style and go through all of that front matter that talks about the publishing process. And there's a whole section in there about clean typesetting.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
That's really great advice.
There's a couple of other like specialty books also that like actually show you how to do that, you know, that graphically show you that as well. So if anybody needs titles of books, I have those as well.
You know, I think that might be something we can post. Like maybe we can create a discussion post of that here in Circle about what we use
I like
for
that.
guys at home for just specifically to discuss this kind of stuff. So
Okay.
Yeah. And I just saw Tanisha's chat too, like boundaries are super important. So this is very much a process of respecting that person who hired you. Like they're a company, they have limitations put on by that company. You have to respect the boundaries that they've set, and then you have to defend your own, because there's a lot of boundary pushing in publishing. There's so much. And when you've got something that is on deadline or wildly off deadline, it's so easy if you've got like, oh, well, I could fix that. I could totally take care of that for you without getting paid for it. And it's still a business.
I was thinking that brings me up. I keep coming back to the concept of the overachiever and me wanting to demonstrate, look at all the things that I know, how I can help you. And then what are the listening skills that I have needed to develop that's not your job. They have asked me to do, and I've gotten corrected once by this. And I remember it was just painful to hear, like, you need to stick to what we asked you to do, basically. And it happens. And overachieving and overdoing does nothing for you in this industry unless, they're encouraging that. So I learned that kind of the hard way.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and I also think that when a lot of us come from, or if you do come from an in-house position, whether that's in publishing or in another type of business, where like this one place I worked, if you said like that's not my job, like they would probably say, there's the door. Like you could be asked to do the most outrageous, like, and I did. And that was just, it was more of that kind of entrepreneurial startup culture where whatever needs to be done is your job regardless of who you are. And so I think that it's helpful to talk about these things in terms of being freelance, being contracted for work, being paid on a, per project or hourly or whatever basis, and understanding that, one, you need to be fairly compensated. And so doing everything you're not going to be compensated for doing everything, right? So like your new job is to run your business and to watch out for yourself. And then also sometimes going above and beyond, especially like if we don't have some of this background that Kellie has given us, sometimes we're creating more work or we're doing work at the wrong point in the process. You know what I mean? And it can be really hard when you care a lot about the book, the project, whatever it is. It can be hard to let things go because sometimes we do have to say like, okay, if I were the publisher, this book would not be going out like this, but I'm not their author and I'm not the publisher, and I have to work within my remit,
Yeah, and I'm not getting royalties for any part of it. So,
and I will note too that the boundary pushing is endemic. And my last in-house company had been in business for 50 years, and there were still 3 people at various levels of that company who had acquired the jobs of 3 other people at least, because somebody left and it needed to get done. And like so-and-so took it over just until they could hire a new person, and then they never hired a new person, or they hired a new person but assigned them different tasks. So
yeah,
it's just, yeah. And
so I have Kellie, because we're almost at the hour, and I know that you have projects to complete as well, and everybody here probably has too. But I wanted to ask you one quick question, which is, and I don't know if it's quick, but if you could go back as a production editor and do something different, or now that with what would you have prepared differently? Is there anything that you would have done maybe at the beginning that you hadn't done? Does that make sense? I feel like I overcomplicated that question, but
if I could go back, what would I change?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that.
That is a difficult question. By far, the worst job that I had in all of those was the one where I ran a book warehouse. I was wildly undersupported. I was angry all the time. I had an author who came to pick up books and stalked me. It was gross. And I definitely was not getting paid enough. I wish that I had gotten that experience but left sooner.
Perfect.
So I would say and if this is a thing that I have also learned, I am getting so much better at walking away from things that aren't serving me. So I'm finishing a contract right now. I declined the chance to renew it because the people are great and the pay is not. And I do not like the kind of work that I am doing. So it is better to walk away before I get resentful, because then I stop doing my best work.
And Brittany, I think
you asked a question too, and Tanisha's question was okay, let's see here. What project I helped with that I am most proud of and enjoyed working on the most? And there have been a lot of them, but the one that really has stood out most recently is I started out as a copy editor on an indie memoir called Finding Home, and really hit it off with the author. So we ended up doing some developmental work, and then I did the copy edit, and then she asked me a couple questions about how to go about publishing it, and that turned into a freelance production contract. So I basically consulted with her on getting, I helped her find a designer, I helped her find a proofreader, I did quality control and all that. And then the book came out, and she was so happy, and I really loved the book. It's not true for all my indies. And it was great. It was so great. And she was so happy, and we still have a call about every 6 months just to chat and hear how the book is going.
Thank you, Kellie, so much. As usual, our heads, my head is exploding. I feel like I need tonight. My reading is going to be the first part of the Chicago Manual of Style again, just to have that refresher, because I feel like what if there's something that
cover to cover.
There might be something. What if I forgot something that's in there that I need to know about? So thank you again for being so generous and always sharing, everything that you know with us. It's so valuable, and we really, really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Definitely, feel free to email me. You are welcome to email me. I would love to talk to you. And find me on Blue Sky if you're doing the Blue Sky thing. I am trying very hard to get better at social media for my business, and it's much better if you have friends.
It is. And I do want to mention that Kellie is available for 1-hour consultations with editors. If there's anything about your process that you want to have reviewed, you can book a paid consultation with Kellie. She's helped me with a couple of things in my business that have been incredibly helpful, so I can't recommend her enough. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great end to your year.
Thanks.